Hey everyone, this is Eric Hayden. Appreciate you joining us today. This is part 2 of our rose tour. It's May 24th. Yesterday, May 23rd, we detailed this first half of the garden. We mentioned that these two beds are the most established. They were planted in 2017. That's why they are our largest roses. And we also covered this bed, which is our newest one, and that's why they're the smallest. These beds are kind of in the middle in terms of when they were planted. We've lost some because of winter and hurricanes, so we'll go over that and the varieties that we have. I'll also mention where you can get some of these. This is Crescendo. I won't spend a ton of time on this because this is the second Crescendo we have in the garden. Obviously I like it. It's got a nice fragrance to it, good form, and it goes into a nice open bloom as well. One that's a little bit harder to get is Claire Elise. This is another John Smith rose. You'll see 3 John Smith roses in these gardens. Yesterday we covered Randy Scott and Sunny Sundays. This is Claire Elise. Beautiful reddish orange, really nice long stems on it, dark green foliage. Been really happy with this. And they are pretty substantial size blooms. So I do like this one. You can see quite a prolific bloomer in the garden. Again, a little harder to get. This is up there with exhibition roses, so not as commercially available, but still really nice. And I'll try to include those links. Places like K&M roses and Wisconsin roses tend to be your specialty locations to get some of these harder to find roses. Something like Crescendo, Veterans Honor, again, more commercially available. This is Dublin. I'm not sure what zapped it, some type of disease. It might have been a little downy mildew, but I'm not quite sure yet. So not as prolific in the garden this year. A nice open bloom of Dublin there. It's an older rose. This is more like it. It's pink and it gets smoky on the edges, especially in the summertime heat. Really nice bloom. It has been a top exhibition rose. And again, it suffered a little bit of some type of disease. I'm not exactly sure. The leaves are purple on the underside and a little reddish on the blooms, but it's hot now, so I'm not too worried about it, but it's a little bit farther behind than the other ones. Another double in the garden, the second variety of Let Freedom Ring. If I have doubles, obviously it's a pretty good growing rose. It's right up there in terms of reds with Veterans Honor. What I mean by that, it has substance, nice petals that hold up in the heat, and also make a good cut flower. So Let Freedom Ring is something that you can find commercially available pretty easily. This is another second rose. This is Louise Estes. I got this as a maiden rose from Wisconsin Roses. What they are, that site, Steve Singer, specializes in grafting budded roses onto multiflora. It comes to you like that, and you cut the top off, and all you're growing is that little bud on the shank of the multiflora. And usually I leave it in the pot a couple of months. Once it becomes root bound, I put it in the ground midsummer, and then by the following year it usually looks bigger. I have to think back, this might be going into the 3rd year, I can't remember, but by the end of the 1st year it's usually equivalent to a grade 1 bare root rose. So it's a really good way to get roses in the garden. Really nice pink coloring on this. As far as exhibition goes, sometimes it has a confused center, so it doesn't always have the single point that you want. But when it does, the coloring is tremendous, and so is the foliage, looking really good. I like to show everything in my garden, not just what does well. This is Moonstone, a dead moonstone. Got that at Witherspoon last year, 2020, because we lost a moonstone in a hurricane. Not sure what happened to it. I think it was partly because of the spring freeze we had this year. I already had a potted up bare root moonstone from Palatine Roses I got in December of 2020, and that is going to replace the dead one here soon. In this garden, one that you can get pretty easily commercially available is Marilyn Monroe. Only hesitation on this might be for the colder climates. It can be a little winter tender, but that bloom is outstanding, and it does well in the heat. So it'll hold like this for a day or two, longer if it's not super hot out. We've been near 90, and then it opens to a nice open bloom. So really nice in the garden. It's not quite as aggressive growing wise as some other ones, but again, when you have blooms like this, very nice coloring on that. That is Marilyn Monroe. You should be able to get that commercially available. This is actually the second of three John Smith roses. This unfortunately looks like it's going to be a goner from the freeze we had this year. It's a nice pink bloom, always has a center on it. I'll probably have to replace that with another baby's blush because it's really nice. Mr. Caleb, I mentioned, very nice red rose. I've shown you this in past days. This is a fresh one right here. So it is a clean bloom. It does look good. Being super picky, it's probably just not quite has enough substance in the garden, and that's why I rank it behind like a Veteran's Honor would be my favorite red, and second would be Let Freedom Ring. This would come in third, a little harder to get commercially, but really nice green foliage and red blooms. Mr. Lincoln is probably my all-time red because of the fragrance, but we were just talking about cut flowers, Veteran's Honor, and Let Freedom Ring, just a little ahead of Mr. Caleb. This is Silver Cream. This is the third of John Smith's roses, and these two beds from the hybridizer that did Randy Scott and Sunny Sunday. It's just a beautiful bloom. It can, be an exhibition rose, very, very nice. It tends to be a little bit more, get a little bit more black spot than the other ones I've seen. Claire Lee seems to be a little bit more disease resistant, but really pretty bloom on that. A new one over the last couple years is Ring of Fire. These are all open blooms. Look at a prior video if you want to see the form on that. Well, there you go. There's some form on that one there. Really, really nice. I can't really remember if it's got St. Patrick in it. I think it does. So I think it might be a little winter tender as well. But as you can see, it did fine this past year when we had a late spring freeze. This is Cajun Moon, the second one of those I had. It's kind of the sister to Moonstone, but it can get some split centers sometimes. This was not as commercially available as Moonstone. So Moonstone's the one that you can find more easily, but you can see the similarity, the leather type of leaves and the pink and white coloring to that. This right here is a sucker. We'll talk more about that in another video. That is understock, in this case Fortuniana. There's a butterfly. I have a lot of butterflies in the garden. Rounding out our last two beds, now we're progressing into the fragrance garden. Most of these are fragrant. This is Double Delight. Definitely one I would recommend for your fragrance garden for sure. Another good one is Dolly Parton. Big, big orangish red blooms on it. And very, very fragrant. No blooms to show you on this, but one of my all-time favorite roses, Mr. Lincoln. Very fragrant red rose. It does open quickly, so not the best in the vase, but it'll last long enough. Alina, one of the better yellow roses in terms of color and growth. The issue I have here with Alina, and you might be able to see this, is the thrips love it. So you see all those brown petals, and when I move this out, even with spraying, it's really hard to keep this bloom clean in my garden, but it has a very good growth habit to it. I did not prune this back in the spring. I wanted to see how big it could get because it's one of the more fragrant roses, or one of the more vigorous roses in the garden for sure. Headliner, this is on Own Root. Thrips really did a number on this, so not too much to show you yet. Usually the thrips attack those first blooms, and then once I start my spraying, these subsequent blooms should look a little bit better. And rounding out this first fragrant garden is Yolande de Aragon. It's an old garden rose, very, very fragrant. That's why I grow it. This is on Own Root. It primarily blooms in the spring, takes a break in the summer, and then you might be able to get some fall blooms if you prune back lightly in the spring after that first flush of blooms. The last bed, also mainly a fragrance garden, Pope John Paul II. I've been really happy with this. Not really a tall bush. You can see it's more squatty than anything. Brilliant whites, especially if I can keep the thrips off of it. And it has a light citrus smell. This is widely commercially available. I'm going to try to do a video on where I get a lot of these roses because a lot of companies sell different ones. I have some recommendations for what I think are the strongest companies. The problem is some of those don't sell everything. So it's hard for you to just pick one vendor and get everything from vendor A. So I'll talk about the pros and cons in an upcoming video. Pope John Paul II, Secret. I recommended that for somebody that had commented on a white or pink blend that is fragrant, that is commercially available. And look at that bloom, just outstanding bloom on that. The last fragrant rose in this garden is Fragrant Cloud. I do have one open to show you. Brilliant color on it. It does open quick and the petals will fall off, so it doesn't last long on the bush, but the fragrance makes up for it. The other roses in this garden don't have a strong fragrance. Everybody, has different noses, and some can detect some fragrance, but not as noteworthy for fragrance. And pretty much past peak, this is Folklore. Look below and some of the older videos to see the form of this, because these have definitely opened up and they're past their peak. The Sport of Folklore. Folklore is the original orange bred by Cordis in the late 70s. The Sport is European Touch, and you can see the difference. A beautiful apricot. I won third place in 2015 at the Fall National Show. I got first, second, and third. And third was European Touch. Really, really nice form on it. Beautiful color. Not a lot of folks have it, so definitely want to hold on to this variety. It's a very nice one. That's just about it for this garden. You can see this potted up rose here. This is Gemini. This is going to replace probably Baby's Blush. I usually buy a couple roses each fall and find room for them. In the case this time I have some dying roses. That's one of the bare roots we potted up from Palatine. This one I'm probably going to get rid of. It's an own root rose that I won at a rose convention a couple years ago. It's Melania. It's a Fred Wright rose. He is the hybridizer of Mr. Caleb. He found Marlin's Day and made Jewel Grace. So he's had some nice roses. It tends to be a small bloom, and maybe that's because it's on own root. They grow on their own roots versus being grafted. A vigorous variety like Yolande is on its own roots and it's doing well regardless. But we'll see. May dig that one up. We'll see how it does here as we get into the summer. So that's it. I should give you one last, I don't want to ignore the rose we have over here, Dublin Bay Climbing Rose. Decent growth on it. This is only after a couple years. The idea is to block out the shed behind it. So it's got nice foliage, really, really good red blooms, and it is one of the first to bloom in the garden. And then it continues, not continuously, but we had blooms from this in late April. Again, a smaller petal count, and it can recycle pretty quick. So you get another round of blooms pretty quickly. So it's got good growth habit to it as well. So I know we're getting long here in the video, so I will wrap things up. This is part 2 of our rose tour in the 3rd week of May. We're about 10 days behind where we usually are, but things are really popping now with temperatures in the 90s. If you missed part 1, click below, and we did the first half of the garden yesterday, and I will try the best I can to link below places like Wisconsin roses, K&M roses. I've ordered from Palatine. It's probably my favorite mail order, and then I've also ordered from Reagan and Edmonds and some others as well. So have a good one, everyone. Appreciate the comments and the new subscribers. We're certainly gaining a lot and really getting into that rose season. I know you up across the north are probably marching toward your first blooms as you head into the month of June, especially across the Mid-Atlantic as well this latter half of May. Have a great one, everyone.